The night my husband told me that touching me was beneath him, standing in our penthouse overlooking the city, I did not cry. He expected tears, but I was already calculating the exact number of steps needed to dismantle his entire life. He had forgotten the prenuptial agreement gathering dust in his safe, but I had memorized every single line. This is not a story about heartbreak. It is a manual on how to destroy a man using his own money. My name is Lena Caldwell, and at 34 years old, I was standing in a kitchen that cost more than my parents' entire lifetime earnings combined. The digital clock on the oven read 2 in the morning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline of Port Magnus glittered like a spilled jewelry box, indifferent to the woman standing alone in the dark. I had arranged the Wagyu beef and truffle reduction with surgical precision. The candles had burned down to nubs, and the silence in the penthouse was loud enough to hurt. The elevator chimed softly. Grayson Hale walked in. My husband, the man whose face was currently on the cover of Magnus Business Weekly. He stumbled slightly, his silk tie loosened around his neck like a noose he was desperate to escape. The air shifted instantly, filling with the sharp tang of expensive single malt scotch and the cloying, floral scent of a perfume I did not own. He looked at the table, then at me, and his handsome face twisted into a sneer of pure exhaustion. "Grayson," I said, stepping forward, my hand reaching out by instinct. I waited up. "You said you would be home for—" He swatted my hand away. The sound of his palm hitting my wrist echoed in the vast, empty room. "Stop it," he slurred, his eyes glazed but venomous. "Just stop it. Lena, look at you, standing there like a desperate housewife from the 1950s. It's pathetic." I froze, the sting on my wrist nothing compared to the chill spreading through my chest. "I am your wife, Grayson. I made dinner." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that stripped the air from the room. "You're an obligation. Look at yourself. You're aging. Lena, you're boring. I don't want to come home to this." Suffocation. He leaned in close, the smell of the other woman overwhelming my senses. Suffocating me. "I don't touch you anymore because the thought of it makes me sick. Touching you is beneath me now. Stop pretending we are still that couple from 7 years ago." I stood there, surrounded by Italian marble and imported silk. I felt like a mistake in a gallery curating only masterpieces. Everything in this room was increasing in value except for me. I was the only depreciating asset in Grayson Hale's portfolio. He looked at me as if I were a stain on his perfect life, a piece of furniture that no longer matched the renovation. He expected tears. He expected me to beg, to promise I would try harder, to dye my hair or lose 5 pounds. That was the script he had written for me in his head. Instead, a strange coldness settled over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, steadying the tremble in my hands. I looked him dead in the eye, seeing him for the first time not as my husband, but as a liability. "Fine," I said softly. "If that is how you feel, I will upgrade this situation in my own way." Grayson rolled his eyes, turning his back on me with a dismissive wave. "Do whatever you want. Just don't disturb me. I have a headache." He walked past the untouched dinner and disappeared into his home office, the heavy oak door slamming shut with a finality that should have broken my heart. But my heart was not breaking. It was calcifying. I remained in the dining room. I picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux I had allowed to breathe for 4 hours and poured the contents down the sink. I watched the red liquid swirl away, feeling lighter with every second. I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The woman staring back was not the sweet interior architect who fell in love with a visionary. She was a woman taking inventory. I walked to the master bedroom, but not to sleep. I went to the closet, pushed aside the rows of designer suits, and revealed the wall safe. My fingers punched in the code without hesitation. Inside, nestled between stacks of cash and luxury watches, lay a thick manila envelope. The Hale family prenuptial agreement. 7 years ago, they had made me sign it to protect their precious son from a middle-class girl they thought was a gold digger. I took it out, blowing a thin layer of dust off the cover. I sat down on the edge of the bed and turned on the reading lamp. I did not read it with love. I read it with the meticulous eye of an auditor. I flipped past the standard clauses about alimony and separation of property until I reached page 42. My finger traced the paragraph I had memorized but never tested. A slow, dangerous smile touched my lips. Grayson and his high-priced lawyers had been so arrogant, so sure that I would be the one to screw up, that they had included a morality clause intended to punish me. They never imagined the gun would be pointed in the other direction. It was perfect. The ink on the page blurred slightly as I stared at it. Not from tears, but from the weight of memory dragging me back 7 years. Back then, I was just Lena from Riverton, a middle-class suburb where lawns were mowed on Saturdays and dreams were practical. I was an interior architect, hungry and talented, surviving on caffeine and ambition. I met Grayson at the launch of a co-working space I had designed in the gritty, up-and-coming district of East End. He wasn't Grayson Hale, titan of industry yet. He was just Grayson, a guy in a suit that fit well but wasn't bespoke, holding a plastic cup of cheap Prosecco. "You designed this," he had asked, gesturing to the exposed brick and modular lighting I had agonizingly selected. "It makes me want to work harder, like, if I don't succeed here, I'm insulting the architecture." I laughed, a genuine sound that felt alien to my throat now. That's the goal. Make you uncomfortable enough to be productive. He was magnetic. He talked about Northline Capital not as a hedge fund, but as a revolution. He had this fire in his eyes, a desperate need to prove himself that matched my own. We didn't dine at Michelin star restaurants back then. We sat on the curb outside food trucks, eating $3 tacos with spicy sauce dripping down our fingers. He would grab a napkin and sketch out charts, showing me how he was going to conquer Port Magnus. "Right here," he would say, tapping the flimsy paper with a pen. "When I hit this projection, I'm going to build you a studio. Lena, just for you. No more clients telling you to paint everything beige." "I don't mind beige. I'd tease." "I do," he'd reply, his eyes intense. "You deserve color. You deserve everything." We married 18 months later in a small vineyard outside the city. It was intimate, tasteful, and cost less than one of Grayson's current suits. His parents sat in the front row, stiff as statues. I could feel their judgment radiating off them like heat. To them, I was a phase, a cute little diversion before Grayson got serious about his life. They tolerated me because they assumed I wouldn't last, or at least, I wouldn't cost them anything significant. That was when the prenup appeared. It was presented casually, like a menu at a diner. "Just standard procedure, babe," Grayson had said, not even looking me in the eye as he signed his name. Dad's lawyers insisted. "It's just paper. It doesn't mean anything to us." I was 27 and blinded by the idea that love conquered bureaucracy. I signed it without reading the fine print. I vaguely registered the parts about protecting the Hale family trust, but I missed the intricate details about the usage of joint marital funds. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted him. For the first few years, it was good. We were a team. As Northline Capital began to devour the market, we moved up. The studio apartment became a loft, then a condo. Grayson would drag me to construction sites of skyscrapers, pointing up at the steel skeletons. "One day, Lena, I'll buy the whole damn building, and you can design every inch of it." So I did. I dropped my smaller clients, the ones who paid my bills when Grayson was broke, to focus entirely on his world. I designed the Northline offices. I decorated our homes. I curated his image. I built the stage he stood on, brick by brick, swatch by swatch. But as the zeros in our bank account multiplied, the Grayson I knew began to fade. The tacos were replaced by reservations at places where the menu had no prices. The sketches on napkins turned into NDAs and closed-door meetings. "I can't do dinner tonight," he started saying more often. "I have to maintain appearances. You understand." "Right. It's for the brand." The brand. Everything became about the brand. Our marriage stopped being a partnership and started feeling like a merger. He stopped asking about my day and started critiquing my outfit choices for galas. "Wear the black dress," he'd say, not looking up from his phone. "The red one is too loud. We need to look stable." I sat there in the silence of the penthouse, the contract heavy in my lap. I traced the signature at the bottom, my signature. It looked so hopeful. I closed the folder, the sound sharp in the quiet room. The man who had promised to build me a studio was gone. In his place was a stranger who thought touching me was an act of charity. I looked at the reflection of the city lights on the glass table. Grayson hadn't just changed. He had molted. He had shed his humanity to fit into his tax bracket. "You think I'm the one who isn't good enough?" I whispered to the empty room. "No, Grayson. You're the one who forgot who built your throne." I wasn't the girl from Riverton anymore. I was Mrs. Hale, and Mrs. Hale was done building. It was time to start demolition. The erosion of my marriage did not happen with an explosion. It happened in slow motion, starting about 2 years ago. It began when Grayson looked at my architectural sketches for a small bookstore renovation and sighed, a sound that carried more weight than a scream. "Lena," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt heavy rather than comforting. "You really should stop taking these trivial projects. It does not look right for the wife of a major investor to be haggling over paint swatches for a shop in the suburbs. You need to focus on the house, on your image, on us." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that those trivial projects made me feel alive. Instead, I nodded. I canceled the contracts. I told myself I was being a supportive wife. I shifted to freelance work, but only for the high society friends Grayson introduced me to. Suddenly, my creativity was no longer my own. It was just another extension of Grayson Hale's network. My income became a trickle, entirely dependent on his referrals, binding me to him in a way I had not anticipated. Then came the season of the galas and the yacht parties. I became a fixture at his side, a silent accessory in designer silk. I stood on the decks of boats that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, watching Grayson work the room. He was electric, shaking hands, flashing that practiced smile for the photographers. I was just there to soften his edges. "Stand up straighter. Lena," he whispered to me once during a charity auction, his voice low and hard while his face maintained a pleasant smile for the cameras. "You look bored. Investors do not like bored wives. It makes them think the home life is unstable." I straightened my spine until it hurt. I thought a child might bridge the widening gap between us. We had money, we had space, we had time. But every time I brought it up, Grayson had a new economic excuse. "The market is too volatile right now," he said one evening, pouring himself a drink and not offering me one. "We cannot bring a child into this uncertainty. Wait until the next fiscal year." "Grayson," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "we have millions in the bank. The market could crash tomorrow and we would still be fine. I want a family." He looked at me with cold, flat eyes. "It is not about money, Lena. It is about timing. Stop pushing me. You are being irrational." I realized then that he did not want a family. He wanted a life without friction. A child was friction. I tried to pull him back to the simple things. I cooked his favorite meals. I suggested movie nights. I tried to plan picnics like we used to have. He rejected them all. "I have a meeting," he would say, checking his watch. "I have a flight to Chicago. This client is important." "Lena, more important than your pot roast." The criticism turned personal. He began to dissect me. He would look at my outfit before we left for an event and shake his head. "You look old in that," he said once, gesturing vaguely at my dress. You need to look younger if you want to fit in with the VIP crowd. Maybe try some Botox or a stricter diet. You are letting yourself go." I absorbed his words like poison. I started Pilates classes 5 days a week. I bought creams that cost $300 an ounce. I changed my wardrobe. I was trying to rebrand myself to meet the standards of a difficult stakeholder, hoping that if I was perfect enough, he would look at me with love again. But perfection was a moving target. The breaking point of my denial came on a humid Tuesday night. We were at a fundraising gala. Grayson had abandoned me for an hour to talk to a group of tech founders. I felt a migraine coming on, so I took a taxi home early, leaving him behind. I sat in the dark living room, scrolling through my phone, when an email notification popped up from our joint bank account. It was a fraud alert for unusual activity. I opened it. There was a charge for $640 at the Vermilion, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. The timestamp was 8:30 in the evening on the previous Thursday. I froze. On Thursday, Grayson had told me he was eating takeout at the office while reviewing quarterly reports. He had even texted me a complaint about the cold pizza. I stared at the glowing screen. $640. That was not a solo dinner. That was dinner for two, with wine, dessert, and no rush to get home. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone. I just sat there in the dark, the silence of the penthouse pressing against my ears. I memorized the name of the restaurant. I memorized the date. I memorized the amount. It was the first crack in the glass. And through it, I could finally see the ugly truth staring back at me. The introduction happened at the Venture Capital Winter Gala. Amidst a sea of black ties and champagne flutes, Grayson placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a high-fashion editorial. "Lena, this is Sienna Brooks," Grayson said, his voice carrying a warmth I had not heard in months. "She is our new director of public relations. She is going to revolutionize the firm's image." Sienna was 27 years old. She wore a slip dress that clung to her like a second skin, and she had the kind of effortless confidence that money usually buys, though in her case, it seemed to be pure ambition. She smiled at me, a quick, practiced flash of white teeth, before her eyes drifted immediately back to my husband. "Grayson talks about you, occasionally," she said, her voice smooth. I watched them as the night went on. They did not touch inappropriately, but the air between them vibrated with a frequency that made my teeth ache. When a photographer asked for a photo of the Northline team, Sienna slid right next to Grayson, angling her body toward his. "Look at that." An investor standing next to me chuckled, sipping his bourbon. "The power couple of the year. They have got serious energy, don't they?" He had forgotten I was standing there, or perhaps, in his eyes, I had already ceased to exist. When we returned to the penthouse that night, Grayson went straight to bed, claiming exhaustion. I went to the living room and opened my laptop. I typed Sienna Brooks into the search bar. Her Instagram profile was public. I felt a cold, clinical detachment as I scrolled. It was like matching puzzle pieces. There was a photo of a martini glass at the Vermilion, captioned, "Late-night strategy sessions are the best sessions." The date matched the $640 charge on our joint card. I scrolled down. A photo of her legs by a pool at a resort in Turks and Caicos. Work trip perks. The caption read. The date coincided with a weekend Grayson had told me he was at a conference in Boston. I checked our credit card statement again. $2,300 for a corporate retreat booking at a resort in the Caribbean. I picked up the phone and called my sister, Molly. It was almost midnight, but Molly was a nurse working the graveyard shift at the county hospital. She picked up on the second ring. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice sharp. She dealt with trauma for a living. She did not do small talk. "I think Grayson is sleeping with his new PR director," I said. My voice sounded flat, even to my own ears. There was a silence on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Okay. Do you have proof? Or just a gut feeling?" "Both," I said. The credit card bills match her Instagram location tags. Listen to me, Lena, Molly said, her tone shifting from sisterly to surgical. You need to stop crying if you are crying and start thinking. Either he is betraying you or he is preparing to leave you, regardless of which one it is. You need to stop letting him control the information flow. Do not confront him yet. If you confront him without leverage, he will gaslight you until you think you're crazy. I hung up and looked at the banking app again. I stopped looking at the obvious charges and started looking at the gray areas. Client consultation, logistics, marketing development. I pulled the data into a spreadsheet. In the last 6 months alone, Grayson had spent roughly $75,000 on expenses that vaguely aligned with Sienna's social media footprint. He wasn't just cheating, he was funding a lifestyle for her using our marital assets. I walked to the safe and pulled out the prenuptial agreement again. I had read it emotionally the first time. Now, I read it like a lawyer. I scanned the dense paragraphs until my eyes locked on a subsection under Asset Division. It was a dissipation of assets clause. It stated clearly that if one party used marital funds to support an extramarital affair, and that affair could be proven with financial records, the violating party would forfeit their right to any appreciation of marital assets from the date the violation began. I almost laughed. His parents' lawyers had inserted this. They had been so terrified that the poor girl from the suburbs, would take Grayson's money and spend it on a lover. They had built a trap to catch a gold digger, never imagining that their own son would be the one to step into it. If I could prove that every dollar spent on Sienna was a violation of this contract, I wouldn't just get half, I would get the growth. And Northline Capital had grown exponentially in the last 2 years. I did not shed a tear. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I opened a new file on my laptop. I did not title it My Broken Heart. I titled it The Ledger. I started typing. Item 1. Dinner at the Vermilion. $640. Beneficiary Sienna Brooks. I was not just a wife anymore. I was the IRS of his karma. Dana Rivers did not have an office. She had a fortress of glass and chrome on the 42nd floor of the Millennium Tower. She was a woman who wore lawsuits like couture. When I walked in, she didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She offered me a seat across a desk that was wide enough to land a plane on. You have 5 minutes to convince me you are not just another weeping trophy wife, Donna said, not looking up from her iPad. I placed the spreadsheet I had compiled, the ledger, on the desk. I slid the prenuptial agreement on top of it, opened to page 42. I don't want a settlement, Dana, I said, my voice steady. I want an audit. Dana stopped scrolling. She looked at the spreadsheet, then at the clause in the contract. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned the text. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. This is not a standard clause, she murmured. This is a guillotine. If we can prove he is dissipating marital assets to fund an affair, he doesn't just lose the money he spent. He forfeits his claim to the appreciation of the marital estate from the date of the first infraction. Lena, do you have any idea how much Northline's valuation has jumped in the last 18 months? I do, I replied. About 200%. Exactly, Dana said, leaning back. If we play this right, he won't be writing you a check. He will be handing you his portfolio. We went to work. The emotional wife died in that office. The strategic partner was born. Dana brought in a forensic accountant, a man named Arthur who looked like a librarian but hunted money trails like a bloodhound. We needed irrefutable proof. Not just hotel stays, but the intent behind the spending. I became a double agent in my own life. I reached out to Marcus, an old account manager at the bank Grayson used for his personal holdings. Marcus still had a soft spot for me from the days when I used to bring homemade cookies to the branch. I am just trying to understand the new sub-accounts for our tax filing. Marcus, I told him over a casual lunch, Grayson is so busy, and I don't want to bother him with administrative details. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Mrs. Hale, the structure is a bit complex. He moved some liquidity into a holding shell called Blue Water Ventures. It is supposedly for angel investing. It was not for angel investing. It was a slush fund for Sienna. At home, I played my part perfectly. I attended the dinners. I laughed at Grayson's dry jokes. I even asked about work with wide, innocent eyes. How is the new PR strategy coming along? I asked one evening as I poured him a glass of wine, "Is Sienna settling in?" Well, Grayson didn't even look up from his phone. She is fine, a bit aggressive, but that is what the market needs. Don't worry your pretty head about the details. Lena. I won't, I said, sipping my water. I know you have it under control. His arrogance made him sloppy. He thought I was too stupid to understand the machinery of his life, so he stopped hiding the gears. 3 nights later, I walked into the kitchen at 1 a.m. for a glass of water. Grayson's laptop was open on the marble island. He had fallen asleep on the sofa in the living room, passed out from too much scotch. The screen was glowing. It was an email confirmation from the Gilded Palm Resort in Miami. Reservation confirmed. Oceanfront Presidential Suite. Guest name Grayson Hale. Guest name Sienna Brooks. Dates October 12th to October 15th. Total cost $12,400. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. October 12th. That was next weekend. Grayson had told me he was flying to Zurich for a shareholder meeting with the Swiss partners. I did not take a photo with my phone. Photos could be disputed, metadata could be questioned. Instead, I leaned over the keyboard. I forwarded the email directly to the encrypted server Dana had set up for me. Then, I went into the sent folder and permanently deleted the evidence of the forward. I left the laptop exactly as I found it and went to the bathroom. I locked the door and turned on the tap so the sound of running water would cover any noise. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. "If you treat me like an overhead cost," I whispered to my reflection, "then I will make sure every single penny you spend on her becomes a receipt for your bankruptcy." I turned off the tap. The investigation was over. It was time for the execution. Revenge is a discipline, but survival is a daily grind. I realized that if I spent every waking hour obsessing over Grayson's destruction, I would hollow myself out before the finish line. I needed to know who I was outside of this toxic orbit. I started seeing Dr. Elise Adler, a therapist who operated out of a brownstone that smelled of old books and chamomile. She was not the type to offer tissues and platitudes. She was rigorous. "You are terrified," Dr. Adler said during our 3rd session, leaning forward in her leather chair. "You are terrified that without the penthouse, the galas, and the Hale name, you are invisible." "I am not invisible," I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. "I am just accustomed to a certain altitude." "Let me ask you something." "Lena," she said, her eyes piercing through my defenses. "If I snapped my fingers and that entire world vanished today, what do you have left? Not who are you married to, but what do you have?" The question haunted me for days. It echoed in the empty hallways of the penthouse. I realized the answer was nothing. I had given everything to Grayson. I decided to take it back. I liquidated a small investment account I had from before the marriage money Grayson considered too insignificant to track, and rented a small studio space in the Arts District. I launched LC Interiors. I did not use the Hale name. I reached out to a younger demographic tech entrepreneurs and social media moguls who wanted edge, not tradition. My breakthrough came when I designed a loft for a 22-year-old influencer with 5 million followers. She posted a video tour of the space, tagging me, obsessed with the lines. "Lena Seastad design is a genius." Overnight, my inbox flooded. I was suddenly being featured in lifestyle magazines, not as Grayson Hale's wife, but as Lena Caldwell, the architect of the new minimalism. My wardrobe changed to match my new reality. I threw out the floral prints and the soft, submissive pastels Grayson preferred. I began wearing architectural pieces, sharp blazers, monochromatic suits in charcoal and midnight blue, dresses with asymmetric cuts that looked like weapons. When I walked into a charity ball wearing a structured white tuxedo instead of a gown, the room went quiet. I could hear the whispers. I wasn't fading into the background anymore. I was cutting through it. Grayson, blinded by his own arrogance, completely misread the signal. He saw my transformation not as independence, but as a desperate attempt to keep his attention. "You are trying too hard," he sneered in the limousine on the way home, scrolling through his phone. "The suit is aggressive. It makes you look severe. You should try to be softer. Sienna says men like women who feel like a refuge, not a challenge." I watched his thumbs flying across the screen. He was texting her right in front of me. I glanced sideways. "She is exhausting tonight. Can't wait to be at the hotel with you. The boring act is killing me." I felt a spike of adrenaline, but I forced my face to remain impassive. I will keep that in mind. Grayson. I recorded the time and content of the message in my mental ledger. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place over a morning coffee. I was reading the Financial Times when I saw a rumor in the market section. Northline Capital was preparing for a massive Series C funding round. The valuation was projected to double, pushing the firm into the billion-dollar bracket. I called Dana immediately. "He is raising capital," I said. "The press conference is scheduled for next month." "That is it," Dana said, her voice crackling with excitement on the other end of the line. "That is our leverage. Investors hate uncertainty. Lena, if we file for divorce and drop the fraud allegations on the morning of his announcement, the valuation will plummet. He will be toxic. So he has to choose," I said, looking at the calendar on the wall. "He can either fight me and lose his investors, or he can settle on my terms to make me go away quietly." "Exactly," Dana confirmed. "We are going to hold his future hostage." I walked over to the wall calendar. I took a red marker and circled the date of the press conference. It was 3 weeks away. "My dear husband," I whispered to the empty room, capping the marker with a satisfying click. "You think you are about to become a billionaire, but that is the day you pay for every single time you told me I was not enough. I was not just ready to leave him, I was ready to bankrupt him." The strategy for the takedown was mapped out on Dana's whiteboard like a military invasion. We were not just filing a lawsuit, we were orchestrating a media event. The target was 8 in the morning on Tuesday, exactly 1 hour before Grayson was scheduled to step onto the podium at the Mandarin Oriental to announce Northline Capital's Series C funding round. "We drop the filing when he is in hair and makeup," Dana said, capping her marker. "By the time he walks out to the cameras, every journalist in the room will have the notification on their phone. Northline founder sued for divorce amidst fraud allegations. Dana had hired a crisis PR specialist named Julian to manage my narrative." Julian was blunt. "We are not going to make you look like a victim. Lena," he told me, "victims get pity. You want respect. The narrative is that you are a silent partner who finally did the math, calm, intelligent, and completely done with his nonsense. I needed one final nail in the coffin. I needed him to admit he was hiding money. I got my chance 2 days before the filing. Grayson took me to the Summit, a new rooftop restaurant that charged $50 for a cocktail. He was being unusually attentive, pouring my wine and touching my hand. I knew exactly what this performance cost. "Babe," he said, sliding a thick document across the white tablecloth. "I need a small favor. With the funding round coming up, the lawyers are being paranoid. They want to update our financial disclosures. It is just a formality to protect the company. I need you to sign this waiver. It basically says you are okay with the current valuation structure." I looked at the document. I did not need a law degree to see what it was. It was a post-nuptial amendment that would cap my payout at the current asset value. effectively cutting me out of the millions that were about to pour in after the funding announcement. I reached into my purse, ostensibly to find a pen, and switched on the voice recorder app on my phone. "I don't know. Grayson," I said, letting my voice waver perfectly. "It looks complicated. Maybe I should have a lawyer look at it." Grayson's smile tightened. He squeezed my hand hard enough to be painful. "Lena, don't be difficult," he hissed, his charm dissolving instantly. "I don't have time for you to play legal eagle. This deal is worth hundreds of millions. If you don't sign this, you are putting my entire career at risk over your insecurity. But the money in the joint account," I whispered, leaning in, "the money you moved to Blue Water Ventures." "Does this cover that you don't need to know about Blue Water?" he snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That is business. I used that money to handle things that are necessary to keep me happy so I can run this company. Just sign the damn paper." I pulled my hand back. "I have a headache." "Let me take it home to read tonight." He glared at me, but he couldn't cause a scene in public. "Fine, but it gets signed by tomorrow morning." As soon as we got home, I sent the audio file to Dana. She called me 10 minutes later. "He just admitted to using marital funds for personal gratification and tried to coerce you into signing away your rights under duress," Dana said, her voice sounding like she had just won the lottery. "This recording is admissible. He is done." The next afternoon, I arranged a private tea with Marjorie Lane. Marjorie was 70 years old, a founding investor in Northline, and the only person on the board Grayson actually feared. She sat in the private corner of the club, stirring her Earl Grey with a silver spoon. "You look different, Lena," she observed, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Less decorative. I am afraid I have some bad news." "Marjorie," I said quietly. I slid a single manila folder across the table. It contained a summary of the Blue Water Ventures transactions and the flight logs for Sienna. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. It will not be amicable, and it will involve a forensic audit of how Grayson has been using company perks to fund his personal life." Marjorie opened the folder. She read the first page without blinking. She closed it and took a sip of her tea. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I respect the company." I lied smoothly. "And because I thought you should know that the captain is drilling holes in the hull." Marjorie looked at me for a long time. "Grayson is a brilliant earner, but he is a liability if he thinks he is above the bylaws." She handed the folder back to me. "Do what you have to do. Lena, the board will protect the ship, not the captain." That night, the night before the end of my marriage, I lay in bed next to Grayson. He was snoring softly, dreaming of the millions he would make the next day. He had no idea that the woman lying next to him was not his wife anymore. I was his executioner. I felt a pang of phantom pain, a ghost of the love I used to have for him. But then I remembered the way he looked at me at the restaurant like I was an obstacle to be removed. "Sleep well, Grayson," I thought, staring at the dark ceiling. "Tomorrow, you wake up in the real world. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the dot, Dana Rivers hit the enter key. With that single keystroke, my petition for divorce was electronically filed with the court, and a digital courier simultaneously delivered 300 pages of financial exhibits to Grayson's personal attorney and the general counsel of Northline Capital. I was sitting in a small coffee shop directly across the street from the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. I had a vanilla latte and my laptop open, streaming the press event feed. The screen showed an empty podium with the Northline logo projected behind it, waiting for the man of the hour. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. It was Grayson. "Lena, what the hell is this email?" Pick up the phone. I took a sip of my coffee and swiped the notification away. On the screen, I saw movement near the side of the stage. The live stream audio picked up the faint, frantic murmuring of the production crew. Grayson was supposed to be walking out in 10 minutes to announce a capital raise of $200 million. Instead, his pocket was vibrating with the destruction of his reputation. My phone buzzed again. Another text. You are making a mistake. You are going to ruin us. Call me right now, or... I watched the screen. The feed cut away from the stage to a generic "Please stand by" graphic. Behind the curtain, the bomb had detonated. At 8:30, the Magnus Financial Daily broke the story. The notification flashed across the top of my laptop screen, breaking Northline founder Grayson Hale sued for divorce. Wife alleges systematic misappropriation of investor perks. It was not the headline Grayson expected. He wanted to be the king of Wall Street. Instead, he was trending as a thief. According to Dana, the scene inside the green room was chaotic. The board of directors had convened an emergency huddle. Marjorie Lane, who had flown in specifically for the announcement, reportedly cornered Grayson while he was still getting his makeup touched up. "Did you use the Blue Water accounts to fund personal liabilities?" she asked, her voice cutting through the panic of the handlers. "Answer me. Grayson, if there is even $1 of cross-contamination, we cannot take the stage." "It is a misunderstanding," Grayson shouted, his voice cracking. She is hysterical. She is trying to sabotage the deal because she is jealous. We need to go out there." Grayson's lawyer, a man who specialized in bullying, immediately suggested a counter-narrative. "We issue a statement about her mental health." He proposed to the room. "We say she is unstable." We discredit the source. But the head of Northline's PR team, who had just finished speed reading the dossier Dana had sent over, shook his head firmly. "We cannot do that. She has receipts. Grayson, she has flight logs matched to credit card statements. She has your own emails. If we call her crazy and she leaks one of those audio files, the stock won't just dip, it will flatline. We are not attacking her." At 9 o'clock, 30 minutes late, Grayson walked out onto the stage. He looked pale. His tie was slightly crooked. He tried to smile, but it looked like a rictus of pain. "Good morning," he said into the microphone. "I am thrilled to announce the next chapter of Northline." He didn't get to finish. A reporter from Bloomberg stood up in the front row. "Mr. Hale, can you comment on the lawsuit filed this morning regarding the misuse of company funds for extramarital activities?" The room erupted. The camera flashed on Grayson's face. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. "We are here to discuss the Series C funding," he stammered. "My personal life is private, but the allegations involve company accounts." Another reporter shouted. "Is it true that the board is launching an internal investigation?" I watched the live stream as the lead investor for the new round. A representative from a massive pension fund stood up from his VIP seat. He didn't look at the stage. He looked at his phone, frowned, and walked straight out the side exit. The signing was not going to happen. At 9:15, Julian, my crisis manager, released our statement. It was short, cold, and perfect. "Mrs. Hale is saddened by the dissolution of the marriage, but trusts the legal system to resolve the significant financial discrepancies that have come to light. She will not be commenting further on Mr. Hale's private conduct." On the screen, the press conference was falling apart. Grayson was sweating. The questions were relentless. The stock ticker for a subsidiary company owned by Northline began to slide in real time, red numbers ticking down at the bottom of the screen. I closed my laptop. I finished the last dregs of my coffee. I felt a vibration in my pocket, one last text from Grayson, desperate and pleading. "Lena, please, we can fix this." I smiled. A small, sharp thing. I did not reply. This was just the first stumble. The fall was going to be so much longer. The fallout from the press conference was radioactive, but the Northline annual charity gala was too big to cancel. It was the social spine of the season, a black tie obligation where portfolios were padded under the guise of philanthropy. The board decided that canceling it would look like an admission of guilt. So the show went on. They allowed Grayson to attend, but the leash around his neck was so tight I could practically see the chafing marks. I did not attend as his wife. At Dana's suggestion, I purchased a platinum table for $25,000 using the profits from my design firm. I walked in through the front doors not as a dependent, but as a donor. I was an equal player on the floor. Before the doors opened, I had a brief, quiet moment with Marjorie Lane in the coat check area. She adjusted her diamond brooch and looked me in the eye. "We reviewed the forensic files you sent. Lena," she said, her voice low enough to be a secret but clear enough to be a verdict. "The board has a fiduciary duty. Sometimes, to save the ship, you have to throw the captain overboard." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. I walked into the ballroom wearing a gown I had sketched myself a structural column of midnight blue silk that required no jewelry. It was severe, elegant, and completely stripped of the frills Grayson used to insist on. As I moved through the crowd, the room's frequency shifted. The whispers were not the pitying murmurs reserved for a scorned wife. They were the hushed, respectful tones used for a predator who had just entered the ecosystem. "Is that Lena Caldwell?" I heard a woman whisper near the champagne tower. "I heard she is the one who exposed the accounting gaps. She looks dangerous." I took a glass of sparkling water and scanned the room. It didn't take long to find Sienna. She was wearing a red dress that screamed for attention, but she wasn't standing anywhere near Grayson. She was laughing loudly, her hand resting possessively on the arm of a 20-something cryptocurrency investor who had just moved to the city. She had abandoned the sinking ship the moment the first leak appeared. I looked at Grayson. He was standing by the bar, holding a tumbler of scotch like it was a life raft. He watched Sienna with a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. He looked older than he had 48 hours ago. His eyes were rimmed with red, his skin gray under the expensive tan. He saw me. For the first time in our marriage, he was the one who crossed the room to get to me. He moved with a desperate, jerky energy that made people step out of his way. "Lena," he croaked. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual smooth baritone. "Please, I need to talk to you. Alone." "You have 3 minutes," I said, checking my watch. "I have guests arriving at my table." I led him to the terrace balcony. The city lights of Port Magnus sprawled out below us, the same view we had from the penthouse. But tonight, it felt like I was looking down from a judge's bench. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "I am losing control of the board. Lena, they are talking about an audit. A full audit." "They should," I said calmly. "You don't understand." He snapped, then immediately lowered his voice, his eyes darting around to ensure we were alone. "If they dig too deep, it is not just the Sienna expenses. There are other creative accounting measures. I did it for us, to build this life. Don't you dare say you did it for us." I cut in. "You did it for your ego." He turned to me, his face crumbling. He reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back. "I can fix this," he begged, the desperation leaking out of him like sweat. "I will give you whatever you want. The penthouse. It is yours. You want a settlement of 10,020,000. I will sign it tonight. Just withdraw the petition. Issue a retraction. Say it was a misunderstanding. Please, Lena. I am drowning." I looked at him. I looked for the man I had married 7 years ago, the man who ate tacos with me on a curb. He was gone. All that was left was this hollow shell of greed, terrified of losing his costume. "Do you want to save the company or save yourself?" I asked. He blinked, confused. "What I tried to save you for years." "Grayson," I said, my voice devoid of anger. "I tried to save us, but tonight, I am only interested in saving the things you haven't destroyed yet. The people who invested in you, the employees who actually work." I turned to walk back inside. "Lena," he hissed. "Where are you going?" I paused at the glass doors and looked back over my shoulder. "You should prepare yourself. Grayson, there is going to be a small announcement tonight. It is not on the program, but I think you will find it illuminating." I left him standing alone in the cold wind, terrified of what was coming next. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The room went silent as the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the cavernous ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental. He gestured toward the stage, welcoming Marjorie Lane to the podium. Grayson stood at his table, straightening his tie, expecting a speech about his brilliance, about the resilience of Northline Capital, about the future he had supposedly secured. Marjorie adjusted the microphone. She did not smile. She did not look at the teleprompter. She unfolded a single sheet of paper from her clutch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marjorie said, her voice steel wrapped in velvet, "Northline Capital has always stood for integrity above profit. Tonight, in light of substantial evidence regarding the misappropriation of company and investor funds, the Board of Directors has voted unanimously to place our CEO, Grayson Hale, on immediate indefinite suspension pending an internal investigation." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the sound of oxygen being sucked out of the room. 1,000 heads turned simultaneously toward Table 4. Grayson stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his mouth, looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of the spotlight. Next to him, Sienna Brooks took a slow, deliberate step back, then another. She turned her back on him completely, blending into the crowd near the exit, erasing herself from his narrative in real time. Marjorie continued, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto mine. "We would like to thank the individual who bravely prioritized the transparency of this system over her own personal comfort. Thank you for protecting our investors." Every eye in the room shifted to me. I did not shrink. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a subtle, silent toast. Dana materialized at my elbow. She handed me a thick cream envelope. "The judge signed the temporary order 10 minutes ago," Dana whispered, her voice trembling with the thrill of victory. "The dissipation clause is active. Since we proved the affair started 18 months ago. Every dollar of asset appreciation in the Hale estate from that date forward is classified as yours. He is not just fired, Lena. He is effectively insolvent. Grayson broke his paralysis." He shoved past a waiter, knocking a tray of glasses to the floor with a crash that no one pretended not to hear. He rushed toward me, his face a mask of pure terror. "Lena," he hissed, his hands shaking as he reached for me, then stopped, remembering the crowd. "You cannot do this. You cannot rob me of everything I built. I am Northline. You are destroying my life over a mistake." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead, the fear in his eyes, the pathetic way he was trying to bargain with an avalanche. "You told me that touching me was beneath you," I said, my voice calm enough to cut glass. "You said you couldn't stand to look at me. Well, tonight. I am just helping you see yourself clearly." A wall of camera flashes erupted as the press corps breached the perimeter. A reporter from the Times thrust a microphone toward me. "Mrs. Hale, do you have a comment on the suspension? Did you leak the documents?" I turned to the camera. I did not smile. I did not look vindictive. I looked like a woman who had balanced the books. "I believe in the law," I said clearly, "and I believe that anyone who uses the love of another person as a shield for their own greed will eventually have to pay the price." I turned and walked away. Behind me, the large digital backdrop on the stage flickered. The name Grayson Hale was digitally scrubbed from the screen, replaced by the name of the new interim CEO, a woman who had served as CFO for a decade. The erasure was instant. I walked out of the ballroom, past the valet line where Grayson's imported sports car sat waiting for a driver who could no longer afford the gas. I remembered the first time I walked into this world, terrified and holding his hand, desperate to fit into a shape that wasn't mine. Now, I was walking out, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as the architect of my own life. I had enough in that envelope to build a design empire that would overshadow anything Northline ever was. Later that night, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It was not a penthouse. It was on the 14th floor, overlooking the river. The wind was cold, but it felt clean. I looked out at the city lights, the same lights that had witnessed my humiliation, and took a deep breath. I thought of Grayson, probably sitting in a lawyer's office right now, watching his world dismantle itself brick by brick. Thank you, Grayson, I whispered to the wind. Thank you for finding my limit first. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from. I would love to connect and hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and if you really enjoyed it, hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.